Good afternoon. So it is, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2024-2025 JHI CBC Annual Lecture by Dr. Tong Lam. My name's Alison Keith. I'm the director of the Jackman Humanities Institute here at the University of Toronto. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered on unceded land that remains a sacred gathering place for many peoples of Turtle Island. It's the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. The Jackman Humanities Institute also acknowledges that it too was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institute is located. The JHI is a tri-campus endeavor with programming at all three of the university's locations and governance that includes deans from 10 divisions of the university. The heart of our activities each year revolves around an annual theme, and this year we've been studying the theme of undergrounds, underworlds. Undergrounds as places of alterity, concealment, exploration, and discovery. Underworlds as spaces of fear, transition, transportation, and transmutation. Our speaker's research on underground cities in China's special zones resonates within all these fields, both in their physical and figurative senses. The JHI CBC lecture series was established to showcase the exciting research being conducted in the humanities and qualitative social sciences at the University of Toronto, and our speaker today exemplifies the best of what we do. For that reason, I would ask you please to mute your devices before the talk begins so we can actually hear about his research. The lecture is being recorded for CBC Radio Ideas, and when Tong has finished, the host of Ideas, Nala Ayed, who is with us this afternoon, will kick off the questions in a short conversation with Dr. Lam. There will also be an opportunity for audience members to ask questions, and Nala will moderate the Q&A. Dr. Tong Lam is an associate professor in the UTM Department of Historical Studies and the director of the David Chu program in Asia-Pacific Studies at the Asian Institute of the University of Toronto. And this year, he has joined us at the Jackman Humanities Institute as one of our 2024-25 faculty research fellows. Tong is the author of A Passion for Facts, Social Surveys and the Construction of the Chinese Nation-State, 1900 to 1949, from the University of California Press, 2011, and a photo essay book, Abandoned Futures, from Carpet Bombing Culture, 2013. As a visual artist, he uses photographic and cinematographic techniques to dissect contemporary China's transformation, as well as Cold War ruins all around the world, and he's exhibited his work internationally. His fellowship project with the JHI explores the history of China's nuclear secret cities, designated for uranium extraction and enrichment, research and development, and, of course, bomb testing, from their inception to the early 1970s, a crucial phase of China's involvement in the global Cold War nuclear arms race. As these underground cities underwent transformations themselves, they also transformed the human and non-human worlds above, with lasting consequences. And I think we may hear about some of these consequences this afternoon. Dr. Lam's talk is entitled, Strange Love is in the Air. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tong Lam.
Thank you, Alison, for such a generous introductions, and it's my great honor to be here this afternoon to deliver this lecture. And of course, I have to say thanks to all the fellows this year who have been very productive year to be part of the JHI. So I will just begin. In 1939, as China was engaged in a brutal full-scale war with Japan, the government, under the nationalists at the time, turned to an unexpected weapon in its fight for survival. As part of a wartime propaganda initiative, a film crew was sent to Qinghai province, a remote grass highland in western China. Their mission was to capture footage that would mobilize the nation and inspire resistance. While the documentary film they produced would soon be forgotten, something entirely different and enduring would come out of their trips. It was a love song composed by the filmmaker's friends, a young songwriter, Wang Rubin. Wang would go on to become a famous folk songwriter, especially in China's post-socialist periods since the 1980s. According to the legends, during the filming process in a beautiful area near Qinghai Lake, Wang had a short but unforgettable encounter with a young local Tibetan girl. Although their encounter was brief, she left a profound impression on him. Her face, her voice, and the moment they shared stayed with him long after he left. Moved by the experience, Wang turned his emotions into a song. Blending Kazakh and Tibetan folklore melodies, blending Kazakh and Tibetan folk melodies with Mandarin lyrics, the song would eventually become a symbol of Qinghai Province ethnic cultures, and more broadly, of Western China's diverse musical heritage. Outside of China, the song sometimes becomes even stand-in as a representation of China's ethnic culture in general. I'm trying to figure out why it's not moving. Oh. Sorry, there was a the statue of Wang Rubin. I'll come back to this later. And here is American folk song singer John Denver singing this song, In That Faraway Land. You can always come back to the YouTube and enjoy this. Nostalgic and melancholic, carried with the song is a sense of beauty and sorrow of a brief and unfulfilled love. Today, if you visit this small and little-known city called Xihaicheng, which is the only city in the area, there is a museum dedicated to Wang's life and music. In addition to his statues, that famous song is also inscribed on the wall of the museum. Technically, this song has little to do with the love story that I'm discussing today. The location that inspired the song, however, is centrally relevant. In fact, 2 decades later, this place would become a breeding ground for many other love stories during China's nuclear mobilization in the Cold War. To make sense of this connection, we need to go back to the Korean Wars in the 1950s, when the United States was flirting with the idea of using nuclear weapons on North Korea and even Northeast China. China's leadership, once anti-nuclear, now believed that they too must acquire nuclear weapons for national survival. To achieve this, China turned to its allies, the Soviet Union. Starting from around the 1950s, or shortly after the end of the Korean War, thousands of Soviet engineers, scientists, technicians, and advisors were sent to China. Among them were geologists searching for uranium and nuclear physicists helping to transfer knowledge to the Chinese colleagues. And it was precisely during this time the area celebrated in this folk song disappeared from the public eye, and the whole region became one of the restricted zones for nuclear weapons research and development. So in a way, this area was enlisted for China's national emergency twice, once as a film shooting location to show national unity under the nationalist government, and later as a site for a new city built by the communist government for its nuclear project. At the time, the city was given a code name, Plant 221, before it was renamed as CBC-JHI after its decommissions in the 1990s. The cooperation between China and the Soviet Union was short-lived, however. By the end of the decade, two countries entered into a bitter dispute due to geopolitical tensions and rising ideological differences between their leaders. As tension escalated, Soviet engineers and scientists were leaving China, taking many of the bomb design blueprints with them. China was therefore suddenly left alone to continue its nuclear ambitions. The city of CBC-JHI was decommissioned 3 decades ago. And about 15 years ago, it was rebranded and turned into a tourist destination, a place that meant to celebrate China's industrial and military heritage. And it was even renamed as China's Atomic City. Across China's southern and northwestern regions, there were at least half a dozen such hidden and restricted places established for China's nuclear mobilizations. In their afterlife, this city often liked to highlight their past involvement in the nuclear project, calling themselves an atomic city in one form or another in order to compete for tourism money. Like CBC-JHI, most of these cities has been designated as patriotic education bases, and they become the destination of so-called red tourism, which is a state initiative encouraging citizens to travel to places that were significant to the history of socialist developments, the revolution, and of course the Chinese Communist Party. During the nuclear Cold War, the main activities of these atomic cities include mining, nuclear weapons research, and testings. These were secret places that were mostly numbered cities or numbered factories. In some cases, the whole city was given just a mailbox number, and they did not exist on the map. And those who were inside them were sworn to secrecies. Not only that they were not allowed to discuss the work with others, not even with close family members, but in some cases, they did not even know the ultimate purpose of these cities until much later due to compartmentalizations, which is a technique of maintaining secrecies. If you have seen the film Oppenheimer, you probably know what I mean. So aside from the standard museum exhibition that we can see today, it is not surprising at all that we know practically nothing about the operation of these former atomic cities. But that doesn't mean that the collective and individual memories of those places do not exist. In fact, over the past few decades, stories of everyday life in these secret cities stories of everyday life in those secret cities have begun to emerge, often in the forms of memoirs, oral history, or even just hearsay. And they have started to appear in books, online publications, social media, films, and even official history. When I began to look at these materials, I noticed that one of the most common themes, surprisingly, is love. Is it possible that these places were arguably among the most sensitive, secretive, and even dangerous on Earth, and yet the most common stories we found are all about love? So let's dive in and take a look at the atomic love story for the purpose of today's lectures. I'm only selecting stories that are from two of the cities, Plant 221 and Base 21, that was centrally responsible for research and development and the final testing of nuclear weapons. You can see those in the map, and I mentioned mining and normally in the south. I'm not including them here because there are too many of these stories. Among the many love stories related to China's entry into the nuclear arms race, there's one story that I encountered again and again. I call this story Love at the Edge of the World. At least in one popular version, the story goes like this. In the spring of 1963, deep in the vast desert of Xinjiang, construction has just begun on a top-secret nuclear test site known as Base 21. One young female engineer suddenly received a classified transfer order. She was asked to report to a secret location in the desert to work on nuclear testing technologies. Because of the strict secrecy surrounding the missions, she could not mention any details to her family, not even her husband's. So she simply told him that she was going on a long business trip. Months have passed. She worked in silence, isolated in the heart of the desert, alone. Then one day, more than half years later, something extraordinary happened. When she was walking near a river inside the base, under the shade of a tree, she saw a familiar silhouette and then a face. It was her husband. Apparently, they had both been transferred independently, secretly, to the same location under the different departments. Neither had any idea that the other was there too. When General Zhang Aiping, China's top commander in charge of the nuclear project, heard about the story of a couple reunited under a tree, he was deeply moved. Reportedly, with tears in his eyes, the general visited the tree where the reunion had taken place. He named the tree the couple's tree, and he declared that a monument. This, however, is only one version of the story. I have seen similar stories that began in a different year, and that the couple would be separated for a longer time. In one case, they would be allowed to leave the city. In one case, they would be allowed to leave the city where they both worked, but without any knowledge that the other person was actually nearby, and travel home for a reunion only once a year. Still, the story ends with them accidentally running into each other under a tree some years later. In another version of the story, a couple wrote to one another. Although they thought that they were very far away from one another, they were actually in the same city. Still, it took several months for a letter to reach the other person because all communication had to go through security clearance in Beijing, nearly 3,000 kilometers away. And then one day, they too found one another under a tree. This story had become so common that there are now competing claims of the same story among different former atomic cities, primarily due to tourism competitions. Despite the proliferation of these stories, it is unclear who the actual couple was or if the trees even existed. Every inquiry into the matter has led to new stories about that story. Everyone who have worked in those secret spaces claimed that they have heard of these stories, or even said that they have worked with one of the couples. Yet, paradoxically, no one seemed to remember their names or any other details. But then, in 2008, the city of Malan, formerly known as Base 21, officially claims the ownership of the story by designating an old elm tree in the nearby deserts as the couple's tree. A small monument was also erected, asserting that it was under these trees where the now deceased couple, Ru and Sang Ren, met. However, based on interview with the couple's co-workers and their children, a Chinese investigative journalist concluded that while the female engineer had indeed once worked inside the test sites, her husband, a soldier, had never been inside the restricted zones. In short, this couple were not the couple depicted in the stories. Still, legends about the couple and the couple's tree have continued to gain popularity on Chinese popular culture and social media in recent years. Indeed, one thing seems to be quite consistent in all this story was that somehow by accident a couple found one another again under a tree in the middle of nowhere at the edge of the desert. The story of the couple tree is only one kind of atomic love tales associated with a tree. In a news website published just a few years ago, I found another atomic love story also related to a tree. And the story goes like this. It was 1967. Xianqin was just 22 years old. She was born and raised in a city in Zhejiang province, which was located in the lower Yangtze region along the eastern coast. 1967, of course, was the peak of China's Cultural Revolution. And Xianqin was among the millions of urban youth being sent to the countryside by Chairman Mao to be re-educated. But for Xiaoqin, the relocation would change her life in an unexpected way. That very same year, a man named Yongwu came home to visit his family. He was 32, and by the standard of the time, he was considered as an old battery. Sorry, he was 32, and by the standard of the time, he was considered an old veteran, and he had spent years in one of the atomic cities working long hours every day. During that visit to his home, through a family introductions, the two met. Shortly after that, they got married. There was no time for courtships and no time to fall in love. It was just the beginning of a quiet understanding. As expected, not long after the wedding, the husband had to return to a faraway workplace. From then on, their marriage became one of distance and longing. For the next 20 years, the couple lived apart. Because of his work was top secret, he never spoke about it, and she never asked. He was allowed to return home and visit her for only 1 month every year. And whenever he returned, he would bring little gifts such as fresh vegetables, local plants, and so on, from wherever he was posted. In 1970s, just 3 years after their marriage, he brought home 3 large walnuts. There are plenty of this around my workplace, he said. I wonder if they will go here. On the final date of his home visit, the couple planted the walnut together in their yard. 2 of them did not survive, but 1 did. And that one became something more. And that 1 tree became something more. Xiaoqin, the wife, cared for the tree with devotion, watering it, watching it grow patiently every day. To her, it was like raising a child. If not just a tree, for her at least, it was about hope, a living memory, a symbol of love extended across decades and distance, a love rooted in silence, resilience, and quiet devotions. The couple never had children. Some neighbors suggested they should consider adoption, but she always said there's no need. Finally, after 2 decades, walnuts came out from the tree. People came from all around, hoping to buy walnuts to use in traditional medicines. But the couple never charged them a single cent. The husband simply gave them away for free with a smile. 2 years after the walnuts came out, the husband passed away due to sickness. Meanwhile, the tree has yielded thousands of walnuts every season. And just like her husband once did, Xiaoqin continued to share with them. Xiaoqin continued to share with Xiaoqing continued to share them with her neighbors. To her, it doesn't matter how many walnuts the tree produces or whether they are worthy of any money. What really matters is that the tree is still there, still going, still with her. Years after years, seasons after seasons, the walnut trees become a quiet companion, a living memory of a love. While many of the love stories involve a tree are about separation and reunion, not all the stories of reunion and separation involve a tree. In one story, for instance, after a couple had been separated from each other for years, it came as a delightful surprise that they saw each other in a celebration gathering after a successful nuclear bomb test. In fact, union or reunion during a celebration ceremony after a successful experiment seems to be another common form of atomic love tales. And I have seen many references of group marriages that were organized for young couples working in the secret places I have seen many references of group marriages that were organized for young people working in those secret places as part of the celebration after the successful detonation of a nuclear bomb. If you are looking for a happy ending in all these love tales, this is perhaps the closest you can get. This is the walnut tree. This takes me to the next story, which is a theater production called Autumn and Love. Released in 1980s, the drama was actually made by the political departments of the People's Liberation Army, set against the backdrop of a secret atomic city, presumably Base 21. The film unfolds in two time periods, the mid-1960s and the late 1970s. Autumn and Love follows four characters: Jiyu, Jieshan, Simo, and Yuping, entrangled in two delicate and overlapping love triangles. The story takes us deep inside one of China's Cold War atomic cities and explore how these young men and women struggle to balance the high-stake pressure of nuclear research with the painful complexity of romance. Told from the perspective of the late 1970s, the story reflects on their told from the perspective of the late 1970s, the story reflects on their youth, a time when they were in the 20s, working for a top-secret nuclear program. Now in the middle age, they look back on those years when love, ambitions, and national duty collided. Jiyan is a brilliant nuclear scientist, devoted, selfless, always conducting dangerous experiments, whether it's in the laboratory or out on the test grounds. His fiancée, Yuping, works as a doctor at the hospital of the base. And then there's Jieshan, the fiancée's cousin, a scientist in her own right, who harbors quiet, unspoken feeling for Yiyan, the devoted nuclear scientist. There's one more character, Simo, another scientist, who had long admired Yuping, the fiancée. In 1964, following the detonation of China's first nuclear bomb, thousands of young people at the base were preparing to get married as part of the celebration of the success. Yiyan and Yuping were among them. And here you can see the preparation for the weddings. And what you're seeing here is actually a comic book that was converted from the theater productions. So this is the images based on the theater, but also become a comic book. However, just before the ceremony, a laboratory accident involving radioactive material required Jiyan's attention right away. Leaving in a hurry, he wrote a note to his fiancée trying to explain the situation, but Simo took the note away before the fiancée was able to see it. She waited, confused, hurt, and humiliated. Eventually, Simo proposed to her, and the two got married. Years have gone by. Now, 1.5 decades later, as the story nears its end, we find Jiyuan is about to die of cancer because of his exposure to radiation. Jieshan, the secret admirer of Jiyuan, had spent the last decade working in Beijing, returning to the atomic city to see Jiyuan in the hospital one last time. She found that he is still the same person, selfless and driven. After her reunion in the hospital, Jiyuan insists that he needs to drag his sick body back to the laboratory for one last time. Before he left, he asked Jieshan to deliver a message to Yu Ping, his ex-fiancée, telling her that he still loves her. Jieshan, with a heart heavy, agrees, even though her own secret feeling for him had never faded. There's no question that Ottoman love is more than just a tale of romance. It is also how these four individuals navigate the deep emotional tensions between private life and public duty inside China's secret atomic zones. It shows that even in times of national emergency, love, longing, and desires do not simply disappear. Yet ultimately, it is nuclear research and patriotic duty that prevails. So what am I suggesting here is that even though we know very little about what happened in those atomic cities during the height of the Cold War, these stories still tell us quite a bit about the nature of nuclear weapons programs, not just in China, but also in other countries as well. As many scholars have suggested, when it comes to the nuclear program, secrecy and publicity are essentially two sides of the same coin. While the development of nuclear arsenals are always kept confidential, their purpose is not just deterrence, but also to project a sense of national pride. In the United States, for example, journalists were routinely invited to witness the spectacle of nuclear detonations, the iconic mushroom cloud. Journalists, and sometimes even ordinary citizens, were allowed to tour nuclear facilities in order to convey an impression of democratic transparency and public assurance, and to shape public opinion about the nation's nuclear program. In the case of China, the political system was obviously very different, but even here, the state had to find a way to demonstrate its capacity and inspire a sense of national pride. Therefore, these atomic love stories are more than cultural spectacles. They are also moral tales. That serve important political functions. As folklore or urban legends, they reveal the ideal cultural norms surrounding China's nuclear mobilizations, especially during the moment of perceived national emergencies. The cultural critic Laurent Barrand argues that in our society today, romantic love is deeply connected to social order and national identity. By promoting fantasy of intimacy and fulfillment, love in Western capitalist contexts reinforces norms about citizenship, marriage, and the ideal of good life. On the surface, Chinese atomic love stories seems to be the opposite of those Western fantasies. If anything, this Chinese love story revolves around separation, unfulfillment, and the suppression of romantic feelings. Even in the case where good marriage was part of the celebration of a nuclear detonations, the closest approximation of a happy ending, the key message is still that devotion to the bomb suppresses all other forms of romance and intimacies. Similarly, in all the stories that involve with a tree, their message is about sacrifice, work, and production, unwavering commitment to the national security states. Ultimately, it is about loving the atom or loving the bomb. However, if that's indeed the case, in the broader sense at least, I would suggest that atomic love in Chinese context is not that different after all. As all these stories have suggested, they are still connected to social order and national belonging. Perhaps even more importantly, these love tales do tell us quite a bit about those secret places. They tell us what was needed to join the global nuclear arms race and to develop the most deadly and dangerous types of weapons on Earth. In these stories, love is about unfulfillment and the necessity of making sacrifice for the nations. The joy of celebrations is radioactive, and the blossoming trees are symbols of separation or even death. This love story may be strange, but they are not unfamiliar. Now I would like to go back briefly to the love story and love song that I mentioned at the beginning. A song that continued to capture the cultural imagination of many Chinese people regarding Western China's ethnic minorities, a song by Wang Rubin, and the related story had nothing to do with the secret songs of China's nuclear weapons development that emerged 2 decades later, except that Plant 221, one of these secret atomic cities, were built on the same geographic locations. Precisely for this reason, the story reminds us of another troubling aspect of nuclear development, one that has happened across many parts of the world. For uranium extraction to bomb testing, the development of nuclear program often impacted vulnerable local populations, as they often took place on indigenous and native lands. This includes the indigenous communities in Nevada, New Mexico, the Pacific Islands, and beyond. In the case of Canada, which supplied uranium to the United States for the nuclear testing until the 1960s, uranium extraction occurs on treaty lands, including those in northern Ontario. I suppose I could end my presentation here because it's getting too dark and depressing. But I will offer one more story. Let's call it a bonus. In some of the stories that I mentioned earlier, particularly those referencing group marriages following a successful nuclear test, they are often set in 1964, the year when China successfully tested its first nuclear bomb. At the time, because of secrecies, the nuclear project was officially called Project 596. 596 stands for 1959 and the month of June. It was in June 1959 the Soviet Union began to withdraw the scientists and engineers from China, believing that China would never be able to develop the nuclear program on its own, or at least not in a short time. The quick success of Project 596 was therefore rather significant. It represents not just a symbol of China's technological triumph, but also a symbol of self-reliance. However, in order to maintain secrecy in the final stages, it appears that there was also an unofficial code name for Project 596, especially given that there were also fears and perhaps indication that either the United States or the Soviet Union might attempt to disrupt the program. According to some memoirs written by some of the engineers and officials who worked on the projects, the bomb was informally called Miss Chiu. Miss Chiu was a bit of a wordplay. The character Chiu sounds like another Chinese character Chiu, meaning sphere. The character Chiu sounds like another character. The character Chiu sounds like another Chinese word Chiu, meaning sphere, which was a reference to the shapes of the bomb. And there's more. Those long winding cables attached to the device remind the participant workers of a woman's hair. So the images that you're seeing here on the right are not that bomb, but they are similar. This is the replica of the bomb used for Trinity tests. But I assume they look similar. We have never seen it, right? Because we don't know. The metaphor quickly took a life of its own. The final assembled stage of the bomb was called dressings. Once mounted on the platform, they said that it was in the upper room. As for the weather conditions, it was communicated as blood pressure. So picture this. When her blood pressure was just about right, Miss Chiu was in the dressing table, combing her hair, getting ready to enter the upper room. Is this story's truth? I really don't know. But it's a good story. Thank you.